pleasure to introduce our panel today, the latest in our Lusk perspectives. Today, our topic is changing typologies and construction innovation in housing. I am Mary Lynne Boorn, and I'm stepping in for Richard Green, who cannot be with us today. I have a wonderful group of speakers here today. We have Rick Holliday, who is the CEO and co-founder of Factory OS, which is a multifamily modular building manufacturer. We have Janet Stephenson, who is the head of the building platform sales for the global leader Katerra construction firm. And then we have USC's very own Lucio Soibelman, who is the Viterbi Dean's Professor and the Department Chair of the USC Astani Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. So clearly a wonderful group of folks today to address the various questions we have about what is happening in multifamily and housing construction. What are some of the innovations that are coming on board? A lot of it is happening kind of in this prefabricated manufactured aspects. And so I think I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with you, Rick, because you have such an interesting story. You were a developer and you were a quote unquote client before you went into the actual manufacturing side of things. So I'd love if you could talk to us about that first and just share with us a little bit more about kind of how your latest venture and how you and your partner came to decide to start this business.
Sure. Well, it's nice to join this illustrious group. I've spoken at the UC Berkeley Fisher Center, and according to all my Southern California friends, this is a major upgrade.
There you go.
So it's nice to be able to catch up with folks from Southern California. Many people in Southern California may know Lake Tahoe. It's a popular area, and I had a large project up there in 2015 that I got 1 million square feet approved for. And I said to my partner, I don't think we'll ever be able to build anything remotely affordable or for the workforce if we don't find a way to build it somewhere else and bring it up to Truckee. And the modular manufacturing business had been a fairly logical choice for communities like this where you have shortened building season and constrained labor markets. So I thought we would be a customer of our company. We chose a company in Sacramento named Zeta and decided we would try to a pilot project in San Francisco of about 130 apartments in 2015-16. And the good news is we saved time and money and learned a lot about the whole business of offsite building. The bad news is Zeta didn't have enough capital or deep enough management structure or a large enough facility to actually sustain itself. And they went out of business one job after ours. And that led to some people encouraging me for us to start our own factory, which I did in 2017. I signed a lease almost 3 years to the day here in Mare Island, started production 2 years ago. And I'm very pleased to report this is a very poignant day. They're setting the units in Truckee today for 77 artist affordable units. I just got photos this morning. We're on the 4th floor, the 4th day into the set. So we're actually closing the loop today, and it's a very happy day. So
that's great. Well, it's a wonderful way to kind of kick us off because you really are addressing the fundamental aspects of labor shortage, housing shortage, affordability, and probably equal importance that we'll touch on more, I'm sure, especially with Janet and Lucio, is the issue about sustainability too. So thanks for getting us going. So Janet, I'll turn the floor over to you a little bit for a moment here, and would love to hear about just, give us a couple of the highlights of what Katerra is doing primarily in this housing space. What kind of products are even, out there and kind of cutting edge? Where do you see the easiest adoption of some of the products and maybe, some of the challenges? I know that's a giant question, but at least start talking about kind of, Katerra and, the innovative products that you have, because I know you've really been at the leading edge and are really looking at this from a global perspective. So.
Thank you for that introduction, and it's certainly a privilege to join this conversation and audience, so thank you for having me. That's a giant question, and I'll try not to hog all of the time here. But I think it's probably worth just, if you'll indulge me, giving a little potted history of where Katerra is today, because we're a very different company today than we are when we began. And today at Katerra has been a frequent phrase of mine, just to kind of keep up with the constant evolution and growth of the company. So we started about 5 years ago, and I've been with the company for 3. Our very first year was dedicated just purely to global supply chain of materials. Our founders were having conversations about a couple of projects. There's 2 projects happening down the road. Oh, you must be getting a great deal on doors. Probably not, because they're contracted in completely separate ways, right? Oh, I'm global supply chain. We've got an answer for that. Very quickly, of course, the sub-market became the barrier because of the relationships with the subs and materials. And this is what I love about Katerra in terms of problem solving, which is, well, if that's the case, clearly we just have to become our entire general contractor and own the full system from design through material specification, global supply chain, manufacturing, construction. I joined when we started opening up to our first customers beyond our founding customer. And we were fully dedicated to a turnkey service of designing a building as a product. And that is a term that we call building platforms today. That was 3 years ago. There were 700 of us. Today, it's over 7,000, maybe 8,000, I think, the world over. And we have very significant operations in India and in Saudi, which have a very different business model in many ways to the one in the domestic US. So today at Katerra, we have, through acquisition of a lot of general contractors, got 3 major stands. So I'm squarely within building platforms. That's designing a building as a product. It's like a very high quality IKEA kit of parts, except we assemble it for you as well. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Katerra's name related to mass timber and the acronym CLT for cross-laminated timber. We have a factory in Spokane that's dedicated to that. And so we have a full mass timber industry. And you can access us in so many different ways there. There's a turnkey product, which is specifically around a mid-rise office product, and rapidly becoming a CLT and structural hybrid opportunity for the urban market, particularly 8 to 12 stories. But you can also access us from simply materials. We work with other GCs. We can provide design assist and materials to third-party architects and developers and GCs. We can provide the design. You can really mix and match within that industry. And then finally, we've got just a solid core of general contracting as well across the US.
In housing, Janet, where does that kind of relate to this IKEA kit of parts? Do you do a similar type of product for that?
Very much so. So in terms of housing, obviously that was where we really started our focus. From an easiest to understand how to design as a product, we've started with the suburban market with that 3-story walk-up garden style apartment complex. A big part of that is because we don't get the urban constraints. And so we can really understand how to design the philosophy of delivering it with off-site manufacturing. And from there, we're taking that philosophy into ever-evolving building typologies that by nature cannot be 100% designed as a product. And then I'll just say, one of the things that we do terminology-wise, we're not a modular company. We're very much a kit of parts. It's like a major Tetris challenge. It's sort of, we don't like to ship air, but it also gives us a little bit of design flexibility that responds to some of the sites, some of the design review guidelines. It makes sure that off-site manufacturing isn't equated to the old concerns that you're just sort of bashing out cookie cutter, poor quality product, which is not what we're about.
Yeah. Well, that was very helpful overview and an introduction. I'm going to switch gears here to Lucio for a brief moment, and then I have so many different questions. So we'll kind of get back to, I want to talk a bit more about kind of supply chain and other aspects too. But Lucio, you know, I know you're super active in terms of the industry and the cutting edge of research. And so as we're just kind of introducing this topic to our audience, what do you see? You had talked about, you know, your beginning in construction and development, and your ever excited hope that we would get to this point where there would be more kind of prefabricated, more technology used in the manufacturing process. And so can you talk a little bit about kind of the more recent adoption to this new technological advancement in construction, and some of the products and things that you're most excited about right now?
So I think that the hypothesis here that I would like to present is that we are in an inflection point now. We've been talking about prefabrication, modularization for many, many years. And some success, a smaller success, and some failures. But I think that this is the moment that things are really, really changed. And the hypothesis here is that we are moving from a data poor environment for a very data rich environment. When you talk about modeling, you talk about digital twins, you talk about BIM, all this is empowering us to rethink the industry in a different way. In 1990, I got a fellowship from the Japanese government. I went to study in Japan with the large construction companies in Japan, Kajima, Obayashi, Shimizu, and they are deploying robotics, for example. They are trying very, very ahead of everyone in the curve. They were developing several types of robots, and they failed. They failed in 1990 exactly because you had to program the robot. You have to start from scratch, teaching the robot where is the wall, how to build the wall, what are the wall characteristics. Now all this information is available in a 3D model, in a BIM, in a digital twin, and you can feed those robots and you can feed the machine for a fabrication in a prefabrication model. In 3D printing that it's coming to construction. All those things are coming, not because the technology today is better than the past, but because the information is available, data is available, those models are ready available, and you can just feed your robots, your machine with those models and start fabrication. So I think that this is the point that everything is changing and allowing us to rethink the industry in a much very rich environment where we have data and information.
Well, thank you for that. So Rick, I wanted to switch back a little bit to the conversation with you, and I think Janet might also have some interesting insights to add as well. But one of the things that came up in our earlier conversation was the issue of constraints for the factory and the manufacturing, and how far you can kind of go before you start eating into your cost savings with transporting materials. And so I know, you know, you're very focused on Northern California, but clearly that issue of moving this kit of parts to various locations is a challenge. So if you can talk a little bit about what your experience has been with that, Rick, and then Janet, maybe you can talk about how Katerra deals with that kind of on a bigger scale. So Rick, if you can start us.
So back to the Truckee project, this is a case in point. That's about a 3-hour drive from the Bay Area, from Vallejo. And we sent 77 units up the hill to that site about 10 days ago. They started setting last Wednesday, and they'll be done with the setting of the first building probably tomorrow. And so we can ship air, which is less efficient, I would agree, and presents certain challenges. But one of the benefits is we're shipping a fully formed finished room down to the toilet paper hole being done. So there's very little offsite labor need. We're just going to skin, roof, and landscape the site. The 3-hour trip costs about $1,000 per unit. maybe 1,500. We haven't got the exact numbers. We haven't got all the bills in. To go to Southern California, conversely, it's about an 8 or 10 hour trip, would add about $1,000 or $1,500 more dollars per unit. What we've learned from the companies that are in Idaho, which have really been supplying a lot of the Western United States, LA and Northern California, is they can send things 12 hours. So that's been happening. The cost is around $5,000 a unit. So I think you've got to have the savings in your overall budget to start offsetting the transportation costs. But if we're saving 20, 30% of the overall construction price, we're saving so much that the transport is not unimportant, but it's doable.
Janet, have you found that to be the case as well in terms of your distribution system?
Yes, absolutely. I can't rattle off the specific metrics of cost, but we very much have sort of a mapping of not just the delta of transportation, the freight costs, but also labor costs. And so where certain products, the most value is not just in the freight, but it's in the labor pool. And then there's also the baseline cost of the product. So for example, in California, you've got, for our first factory in Tracy, California, we've got high labor, we've got approximate distribution. We've also got some seismic issues and some high Title 24 performance codes. So there's a complete delta of all of the things that need to be the baseline of the product that start to make the value proposition happen. In Texas, for example, the labor is extremely low. So even with a factory in Texas, we really have to take a look at where the value proposition is for certain products.
So it's a market by market, kind of product by product, if you will.
It can be. You know, you've got the same product that ships to Nevada, which isn't that further, but Nevada has some very different sort of codes and other things that we need to sort of plan for as well. So it all comes together in a bit of a algorithmic pattern.
Yeah. Lucio, do you see that potentially standardization of kind of products and then almost like manufacturing is kind of like a Model T or something like that, where, you know, you have the technology, the robotics, the systems in place that then kind of, I don't want to say push out labor, but kind of encapsulate a cost within that system and then, you know, allow savings to kind of occur in a little bit of a different kind of way? Is that a way that technology is happening?
I would answer in two different ways, okay? One, I would say that you don't even need to go all the way to fabrication when you talk about modularization. I worked with a company in South America, in Latin America, that they have 100 million square feet projects at the same time. And they solved this problem, for example, in bathrooms. All the bathrooms have the same distance from the toilet bowl to the sink to the shower. So the architects can design the bathroom wherever they want, but all the distances from the bathroom equipment are the same. So every bathroom is a kit with the plumber comes, everything pre-cutted, and they always assemble. They don't have to look at blueprints. They are extremely fast assembling it. And they do millions of those bathrooms every day all over the Latin America, and they're extremely efficient doing this. So even that, you can bring some of those concepts to the construction site. You don't have to do everything off-site. So it's just the philosophy of optimizing the design and bringing how we are going to build and assemble those things in a much smarter way. This is the first part of the question. The second about robotics, it's happening now. A lot of robotic solution coming to construction, even bricklayers like the SAM, but they are not replacing. They are just replacing the back breaking job from bricklayers, so they can work for a much longer lifespan. So bricklayers tend to retire young because physically they cannot survive. So when they are bringing robotics now, they still need the bricklayer, but all the heavy lifting job, it's being done by the robots and saving the life and the health of keeping them healthy and working for a much longer span. So I think that a lot of things happening at the same time today, and it's been a very exciting time in this industry.
Yeah. Rick, that brings us to an interesting point. You and your partner made a very specific decision to go with a union, all union shop. So if you can talk a little bit about that and how that's impacted your business model, both to the good and maybe some challenges in there as well, as labor addressing with labor shortages and training and all of those, and some wonderful just economic development that you're doing.
Yeah, that was a big decision we made about 3-4 years ago. We felt if we were going to be supplying affordable housing projects in the Bay Area, many people that have worked with different government programs know there's all kinds of union imprints that are required. And so if we wanted to focus heavily on getting the cost of affordable housing less expensive, we needed to probably make some kind of arrangement with unions. We found the carpenters union to be receptive. We sat down, made an agreement for 5 years, and it's been a great agreement for us. They recruited workers, trained workers, so it really cut down on our HR needs early, because we hired our first worker in April of 18, which is about 2 years, 4 months ago. We have almost 400 workers out here today. And we've had to hire 600 to get the 400 we have. So you don't necessarily get all of the workers you're going to keep in the kind of labor market we've been in. I think that on the issue of automation, many people think that labor unions would be somewhat skeptical or hostile to automation. And for those of you in Southern California aren't aware, we've had a relationship with Autodesk for 18 months now. And just last week, they invested more money in our factory. They're our largest investor to date. And they're very committed to robotics and using some tools like was being mentioned about bricklaying to prolong workers' experience and to make them more productive so they can be paid more. So our workers are working with Autodesk engineers on companion robots to help them work more efficiently and quickly, like the bricklayer, and are excited about it. And I don't think automation has to be a problem for unions when we have 3.5 million apartments that we need to build in California that aren't built. So so far we've had a good start with getting the unions to engage in the future, and most importantly to embrace technology and see it as a positive.
Janet, has there been you obviously are dealing with a lot of different labor force, both at your manufacturing plants and then on site as well. Can you talk a little bit about how you juggle between the labor in the different markets and how that works in terms of training? If I think about like that IKEA kit, sometimes I have more success than others, but clearly you're bringing in different kinds of technologies than what a lot of groups may be traditionally used to working with too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to reinforce and echo what Rick was saying, not because Katerra came out of the gate with a smart strategy on engaging the unions, but that we were very much looking at that idea of taking away some of the repetitive work and creating a longer pipeline of high quality, potential work. So it's more about the constant volume rather than the one-off project. Just sort of a shift of mentality there. Today at Katerra, we have our own sub, so that self-perform work for our products. And so we have a general contracting arm so for example, in the West, it's Katerra West and we have Katerra East. But for Katerra West, we have a strong relationship internally, which is something that nobody really needs to know about, but this is part of our means and methods. So we have a group that focuses on how our kits go together. And so we can bring those teams to the project with a solid understanding and an efficiency of how it operates on site. There's a strong approach to constructability in terms of you'll see a slightly different construction sequencing on the site in order to get the greatest efficiency. But we can also moderate that based on people's interest in a certain number of units that they want to turn over at a given month, you know, to certain building product types. Interestingly, today at Katerra, because we have this solid general contracting arm and because of the mass timber business as well, we've got a lot of opportunity, you know, while that is very much self-perform and non-union, that particular component of our work, in other scopes of work, we can engage with union labor as well. So there's a lot of different opportunities there to connect.
We had talked a little bit earlier about, you know, one of the biggest challenges in California and some of these markets is, you know, obviously supply and meeting that demand. But you know, a big part of it is that entitlements process. Some of it's the design. You know, I know Rick, you're working on a couple projects in Los Angeles and other places. Do you find that using this type of construction system speeds up this development process and speeds up the entitlement, or is it harder to kind of measure that and see the results?
I think it's interesting. It's speeding it up, and you wouldn't necessarily think that would be the case, but what we're finding is a lot of planning officials and housing officials that are really desperate to get greater efficiencies in their affordable housing programs have come to visit us. And one of the first things that we're able to do is get them over the worries that the buildings aren't attractive. We have some buildings that are finished, people can see them, and they're basically urban apartment buildings that are no different than site buildings. When people can also see that we can do it more efficiently and quickly, they then ask, hey, how do we get Factory OS to build in Napa, for example, which is a neighbor of our Vallejo factory? That's kind of a high-end suburb. And we say, well, you know, your building official probably needs to come down here and get familiar with how the state is responsible for inspecting the units, and you, the building official, are responsible for everything that's not that. And they will send somebody if they want us to be available to their city, and then start working with us around potential planning impediments. And so that's what happened with Los Angeles. They came and said, we have 1.2 billion that we've earmarked for supportive housing. We're not getting enough productivity. How can we work with you? And we said, well, if you tell the 3 nonprofit clients of yours to adopt a standardized floor plan and to work in a more systematic fashion rather than hiring 6 architects for 6 different jobs, why don't you try to get one to do a more repetitive unit? And so the city was engaged in pushing that. Now, if I went to Atherton or Palo Alto and said, I'd like to drop 100 units of Factory OS housing in your community, in some cases, people would default to all the things they worry about with the industry, and we probably would have some friction. But we're finding there's enough interest in what we're doing that we get people that come here and we try to educate them on how they can best adapt their local practices so we can serve them.
So it's more of a education process and having a quote unquote motivated buyer, it sounds like a bit.
Yes.
So it's not so much that the technology itself is easing the process, but that the buyer, whether it's, you know, the public groups or housing developers, affordable housing, are in need of this, and so they they accommodate it.
We have a really first-rate ambassador in our company. Some of you in Southern California may know Carol Galante, who served President Obama for 8 years as the FHA commissioner. And she has a deep history in affordable housing, and she's been teaching at Cal now for the last 3-4 years. Carol is very well regarded and is part of our team in reaching out to communities ahead of time. Or if communities are curious, which is happening a lot, she will set up webinars like this with different local planning organizations to acquaint them with what we're doing.
Yeah. Lucio, I'm curious because you're obviously dealing with people in Mexico and other groups. Have you found that, you know, kind of this type of product is having the same kind of impact other places as well, as far as, you know, adoption and moving it through approvals, you know, because it's a little bit more standardized and maybe there's that, again, that desire for we've got to meet a market demand quickly?
I would say that it's easier than the US. The US would have to evolve the way that you approve projects and the way that we certify projects. When you go to Latin America, the certification is done by whoever is the responsible engineer for the project. The city, you approve the design, but the construction, it's done by the engineer. So you pay a fee and you are responsible. If something goes wrong, you are sued. But the city trusts that the engineers that are certified and are professional engineers, they know what they're doing and they don't have to be seen by someone from the city step by step with what they're doing. So obviously that it's something that the US is going to have to evolve to, and you start moving from the site to fabrication unless the city is going to send their inspectors for every assembly plant in the US. And if you're in Southern California, they're going to have to travel to Northern California to see the construction process. So they have to trust and they have to know that those companies have engineers that are professional engineers that can sign what they're doing, and they are responsible. If something goes wrong, they take the responsibility. So I'd say that the US has to evolve like Latin America to be able to accept those technologies in an easier way.
Janet, you were going to mention something as well.
You know, I think the point about education and mindset is just such an important part of aligning companies like Factory OS and Katerra and others with partners. You know, on one level, Factory OS, Katerra, work very hard to make sure that the client's experience is seamless. But at the same time, when you're creating a change delivery, there's a fabulous partnership with people who understand there are some things about the process that are going to be different. And so a lot of what I've done early on in partnering with clients is sort of determining the alignment of mindset so that we are both able to be successful together. And so given the audience, I just thought I would give a little call out and a plug and an invitation to everyone to be curious and open your mind a little bit and be partners with us as we create the opportunity for this to be a very systematic and a usual way of building.
Thank you. So we have a question out there. And again, to our audience, please feel free to type into the Q&A. I have a couple of more questions I want to throw out to our panelists, but I wanted to address James Torres. He had a question. He said, I have a great interest in creating factory-built, extremely affordable housing for the homeless. Has the panel seen anyone in North America or Europe currently addressing the homeless population using cutting-edge housing technology? And then if not, what can we do moving forward to address this issue in North America, South America, and Europe? So I'm going to leave that open to my panel. I don't want to, kind of direct it to anybody in particular at this point. So do any of you have any kind of thoughts or experience in terms of, kind of this factory-built housing for the extremely affordable piece of it?
Yeah, I can give a couple of anecdotes. This is very Pacific Northwest centric at the moment, but it's an interesting aspect because it's also what stage of homelessness and what kind of solution are you trying to achieve. And so there's a company called Pallet that are doing some light structures that are about sort of a more immediate ability to get shelter. So that's Pallet. I would definitely Google them. And then there's just a darling outfit here called the Block Project, which is a project of facing homelessness. And they are very small. I mean, all of these are a smaller scale. And I think this is the other challenge, is to getting to a scaled level of solution as well. But the Block Project is basically saying, look, there are enough backyards in Seattle that for every entire block, if they house one homeless person, the homelessness would go away. And it's they are now moving to it's certified by the Living Building Institute, so they're rewarding homeless with the dignity of a shelter, with healthy materials and solar sort of energy. And it is starting to be factory built and delivered on site, which is accelerating the ability to deliver. But there's one other component there as well, and they require all of the neighbors, the person who wants to have a backyard cottage, to go around and make sure that all of the neighbors on that block and in their community are engaged with the solution, so that when that person comes to that backyard, they are welcomed by the community, and it's a full experience of knitting and the integration of homelessness. The idea of that is for it to be a 1 year to 2 year solution to get somebody on their feet and off and running into the mainstream world.
Anyone else have experience with that? I know, Rick, you talked about kind of this housing project in Los Angeles. Have you been approached by any of the kind of more to the extremely affordable and addressing kind of more the homeless population?
Yeah, actually the project that's on the line today that I'm watching out there is for 833 Bryant. It's for a group called Mercy Housing in San Francisco that worked with a very innovative private sector group called Tipping Point. They looked at the process of getting homeless units built in the city, and it was a 5-year entitlement, and it was getting us close to $800,000 a unit, which was very, very staggering and overwhelming. They approached Larry and me 2 years ago when we started production and said, can we work alongside you as we get our entitlements? And if you get your company moving the way you're doing, we'd like to basically take advantage of what you're doing. About a week before COVID hit, they broke ground, so they were able to get through a 5-year process in 2 years. And according to their folks that are responding to some media inquiries, their all-in cost is going to be under $400,000 a unit. So you take 5 years and 800, and you go down to 2 years and 400. You can see you can have the limited money go much further than it would have otherwise, and it can get deployed much faster. So we have 3 other jobs that are building off of that experience that are actually ordered right now.
Wow.
Just some comment. I personally don't think that this is a technology problem, but this is a finance problem. I think that this is a question of policy. If you get, for example, in Brazil, they had a program called My Home, My Life, that was invested billions of dollars in low-income housing. A lot of different solutions popped up. So a lot of very smart engineers and people would present solutions where the funding is available for them to try those new technologies. So I think that it has to be a national policy. You have to look at this problem as a problem and try to solve it as a nation.
Well, and the affordability aspect of this certainly feeds into better solutions and hopefully more widespread solutions, it sounds like. So I'm going to pop back over to our Q&A here for a little bit. So we had another question about the process for vetting the feasibility of new technologies. Janet, Lucio, I feel like probably, but even Rick, you guys could all answer that. So the question was, do you have a formal process for vetting the feasibility of new technologies? Does anybody want to kind of jump into that? So, Well, I'll segue the question slightly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the vetting process, but at what point does kind of a new technology become feasible, or, you know, how do you pursue them? Because obviously, you know, there's the issues of transporting, there's the issues of scalable of it, you know, a lot of supply chain issue, which was kind of a question I was going to leave to the very end here. So maybe what makes something more feasible, and kind of at what point do you reach that, you know, moment of inflection that Lucio was mentioning, or that tipping point where it then becomes something that can be really widespread adopted?
I think that the first point related to this is related to performance. So, and performance should be done through testing and evaluation. And this is very clear, and you know how to do this. You have several research organizations and national groups like NIST and others that can evaluate performance of those units and those products being developed. And then the issue related to supply chain and transportation, this is all easy to do with the economic modeling, and there are several tools that can allow us to do the modeling and analysis of the performance of those systems. So I think that this is done today. I don't understand what's the big issue related to that.
Yeah.
I don't think that any of the products that Katerra or Rick are developing are not being tested by performance.
Yeah. I can offer a little snapshot. It's not directly answering the question, because my CTO has got a great method for doing that. But I will say, it goes back to the conversation about sort of a little bit of an algorithmic approach to which product fits in which place well. And it's for example, and what is the value set of the client that makes it worthwhile to them. So cross-laminated timber in some markets at some heights can really be extraordinarily competitive. So we have just, through analysis, we've found that once you get over 75 feet, if you do a structural steel and CLT hybrid system, and you were thinking about doing a concrete building, then we can get a really competitive conversation going. But if you're looking sort of, lower than that, then the opportunities to get competitive to some of the other things that are in the market just shades down. So then if the client is really, the value set is reduction of carbon, then the pricing, it's not necessarily all about the pricing of the product, it's about what the value represents to the client. And so you really have to stay open-minded to what the solution might be, rather than just the pure principles of economics. It's a full business model review.
Yeah. Well, that segues us wonderfully into the other topic of sustainability. But before we get that, hopefully we'll have time. I did have another question from the audience asking about where could we find relevant Southern California cost comparisons for turnkey housing unit cost between modular and stick-built construction? So I know, Rick, you had mentioned kind of a 20% savings type of number. You talked about the 800,000 versus 400. My guess is it's not quite as clear cut, and obviously this is holding aside cost of land, which is a big piece. So we'll just kind of move that off to the side. But we think about kind of construction costs, particularly in Southern California. Are there some kind of rule of thumb metrics or some resources available to help our audience members think about that? And really, that's for anybody.
We haven't delivered a project to Southern California with the savings that we can demonstrate in effect. So, because we're too new. There's a reason why I started in Northern California. This is the epicenter of the worst housing cost problem on the planet. How did it happen? Primarily because we're the epicenter of the technological revolution. Google, Facebook, Apple. Those three companies alone have committed $5 billion to try to subsidize workforce housing. And so we decided we want to engage them, starting with Autodesk, who incubated here. It's now a $40 billion company. So our building is a 300,000 square foot laboratory, in my opinion, to constantly challenge everything about how we're doing it, including whether we'll be shipping air down the road. We may be shipping component parts. But we're excited this week because I can announce it publicly now. Google made an announcement Friday in the Wall Street Journal that they've invested in our company. And we think some of the other technology companies will as well, because they're finding when they try to apply their $5 billion to the affordable housing problem, it just doesn't go very far. Yeah. And that they've got to invest some money that's very serious about trying to drive the cost down. So what does that mean for Southern California? I think we're maybe a year away from being able to give somebody some confidence that there's 20% savings. Why do I think that? I think the costs in Southern California, even with the slowdown, are going to probably continue to rise because of labor issues and all that. And I think that we're going to get better at what we do and be better capable of meeting the needs there. We definitely won't be competitive in Plano, Texas, or places where labor is very, very cheap, and we don't intend to be in those markets. But if you look at what I call the high cost ribbon from Seattle to San Diego, we'll likely be we're very competitive in Northern California now in terms of saving time and money for people. And I think we'll probably expand maybe in the Northwest first, and we'll be in Southern California before long. But I think that most people that are in this industry agree this has been an industry that's been so underinvested in innovation and creativity. And we have costs that don't make sense in Southern California or in the Bay Area. And I think that we can reduce radically the cost of building a house if we apply the technological partners and relentlessly challenge everything we do. We got to get it down from 800,000 in San Francisco to 200. We got to get it down 75%, in my opinion, in the next 5 years.
But I would add something that it's not just a question of labor. So I think that you come here in Southern California, you're going to see that the quality, it's really a big problem. But the biggest issue that I see is material waste. Okay, so I measured in a construction site here 70% of waste in drywall, because they were just cutting and to increase the productivity, because they were being paid by productivity, but not by not wasting materials. So piles and piles of waste coming out of a small house near my house, and I was there measuring every day because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I think that the numbers have to be seen in a much more complex way than just looking at labor and saying labor in Texas is cheap, but you have to see the quality of the final product and the amount of waste that they are producing in the process. It's a sustainability issue, but it's still a money waste too.
Well, to that end,
sorry,
if you want,
go ahead.
Autodesk has put a big investment for us to basically quantify that and focus on that. To your point is that we measure every bin of waste that goes out the door here in the factory. And to your point, we're comparing it to site built jobs. And it's amazing how much less waste there is if you work in an environment like this with a focus on not wasting material.
And don't forget that the waste, it's not just the waste that it's removed as waste from the site, but there is a lot of waste incorporated in the building by making a concrete with more cement than you need, by making a thicker paint or painting with expanding more. So when you see the construction, there is a lot of waste that it's incorporated in the building that is even bigger than the waste that it's removed from the building. In those processes that you have control, like yours and Katerra's, all these, it's completely different, and you can have an optimization that saves you a lot of money.
Janet, I would think that also kind of in your, to use your IKEA analogy again, but just bringing, creating so many of the different kit of parts offsite allows you to control, again, for some levels of cost and waste, and establish a level of kind of, efficiency and sustainability in that process.
Very, very much so. I mean, to both Lucio and Rick's point, with the building platforms, it starts with design. And so we're designing products right at the very beginning to reduce the amount of materials that you need, whether it's the way that we organize the utility spine, so that you can just by organizing the utilities, you're reducing the amount of cable that you need, electrical cable, just that. One of the anecdotes that I always used to love about one of our early studies is, because we know exactly where the electrical boxes need to go and the difference between the metal boxes and the plastic boxes, depending on where they need to be, just that alone means that we can save $5,000 on per project, because with that we can be that precise. So there's the design at the beginning, and then there's the efficiency within the factory. And I spent 20 years of my career advocating and working very solidly on market transformation around sustainability principles. And it's not that at the moment with Katerra, every single input is, red list ready. We're not at a sort of a level of sustainability there, but we're building the pipeline and we're creating the scale that has been challenging for the sustainability movement for so long. And so once you've got that pipeline built and you're operating at that scale of output, then it really just means that you can start changing the inputs, and you're leveraging at an extraordinary level. So that's one of the things that I'm particularly excited about, the long-term implications of the model that we're building.
Great. Well, I think we're actually almost out of time. The hour sure flies by, and I just can't thank all of you enough for your time. So, of course, if we were all in a big room, we would be clapping and saying thank you so much. But wonderful thank you to Janet, Rick, and Lucio. It was incredibly informative, really interesting. And I look forward to continuing the discussion, hopefully in person at a future discussion USC event, something. So take care all, and thank you again.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to meet everyone. Thank you.